Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. If you've spent any real time building out a comprehensive system in Notion, you absolutely know that high, right? That incredible feeling of linking all your data perfectly together. But you probably also know the crushing low of watching that same beautiful workspace slow to an absolute crawl. Well, today we're going to rescue your complex Notion workspaces from that dreaded lag. We're going way beyond the basics here to look at exactly how advanced users are structurally optimizing their data for some serious performance.
Okay, let's dive right into this because the payoff for getting this right is massive. Based on insights from advanced workspace architects and active power users, the structural changes we're outlining today can literally yield up to a 10x speed improvement in your daily workflow. We aren't just talking about a slightly snappier page load here. We're talking about taking a system that feels like wading through molasses and transforming it back into that lightning-fast second brain you originally built. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the Notion performance problem. Second, why complex workspaces lag. Third, the static data snapshot. Fourth, flattening deeply nested relations. And finally, automating your workspace speed. All right, Section 1, the Notion performance problem. We're validating the pain of advanced users. Look, if your workspace is lagging, you are not crazy, and you are definitely not alone. It happens to the best of us. You build a Ferrari of a database, and eventually it just starts driving like a lawnmower. Just take a look at this quote from a discussion among power users. Reddit user spaff_notes. The deeply nested relations is my main slowdown. In certain situations, it's totally bricked my workspace. To deal with this, some users are actually resorting to building manual kill switch checkboxes into their databases just to tell Notion, hey, please don't run this formula right now, I just need the page to load. Guys, when you're manually turning your formulas on and off to prevent your system from bricking, we've got a structural crisis on our hands.
And these issues, they really snowball as your data scales over the months and years. Your system just becomes harder to manage than the actual work you're trying to get done. Plus, there are environmental limitations to think about. For instance, even with Notion's recent official offline mode updates, complex database properties, like those deeply nested relations, rollups, and formulas we all rely on, they simply do not work without an internet connection. The cloud architecture means the server is doing all the heavy lifting. So how on earth do we fix a system that's buckling under its own weight? Moving into Section 2, why complex workspaces lag. Let's diagnose the actual root cause here. So there's a really common misconception out there that simply having too many properties in a database is what breaks the system. Actually, scratch that. It's a total myth. The crucial point is this. It is not the property count, it's the calculation load. You can have a database with 30, maybe 40 static text or number properties, and it's going to load completely smoothly. The bottleneck actually happens when you force Notion to evaluate complex formulas that pull data from relations, which then pull from other relations. Think of it kind of like a math test. If I hand you a piece of paper with the number 42 written on it, you can read it instantly, right? That's a static property. But if I hand you a massive calculus equation that you have to completely solve before you can even read the answer, well, that takes time. When you use live, deeply nested formulas, you are essentially forcing Notion to take a complex math test every single time you open a page. Because of this, we really need to shift our mindset from the old way of doing things to the new way. The old way relies on real-time recalculation, constant processing across multiple database hops, which inevitably causes user interface lag as your workspace grows. But the new optimized way, it relies on stored static data. It's read-only, it's calculated exactly once, and as a result, it is ultra-fast. And this brilliantly illustrates what we're talking about in Section 3, the static data snapshots. This is your life hack for instant speed. Okay, so what exactly is a snapshot property? Well, it's simply a static property, like a basic text or number field that you use to store a value permanently, instead of continuously recalculating it via those heavy live formulas. Going back to our math test analogy from earlier, the snapshot property is basically you writing down the final answer in ink. Notion doesn't have to do the math anymore. It just reads the ink. Implementing this is surprisingly simple, taking just 3 precise steps. First, you create that static lookup or snapshot property in your database. Second, you wrap your complex formulas in an if statement to dictate when those live calculations are actually needed. So for example, if a project status is marked as archived or saved, your formula can just pull the text from the static snapshot property. It only runs the live, heavy calculations when the status is strictly active. And finally, you use automations to update that static field at specific intervals or trigger events. That permanently captures the data so your formula can finally take a rest. All right, on to section 4, flattening deeply nested relations. Time to restructure that database hierarchy. Now, even with snapshots doing a lot of the heavy lifting, you still have to manage how your databases talk to each other. With newer updates to Notion's formula language, you absolutely can fetch data from multiple layers of related databases. But hey, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Check this out. One direct relation between database A and database B. That's your safe zone. Fast, efficient, no problem. But the very second you start pulling data from 2, 3, or even 4 levels deep, say database A relates to B, which relates to C, which relates to D, you are officially in the danger zone. Stacking these relational hops of exactly what bricks your workspace. You absolutely must keep your data hierarchy as flat as possible. To support this flattened architecture, our sources highlighted a few non-negotiable best practices. First off, like we just said, avoid those deep relations wherever possible. Second, vigorously use an archive status. Hiding old completed data doesn't just speed up your visual interface. Recent updates mean archived pages are hidden from search by default, which drastically improves the accuracy and speed of your workspace's AI search results. It's a huge win. Finally, group your pages by active versus completed statuses and rely heavily on templates. Templates let you automate standardized formatting so you aren't constantly piling on unnecessary properties. Which leads us to section 5. Automating your workspace speed. We are letting the system do the heavy lifting now. So we've flattened our databases, and we've set up those awesome snapshot properties. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we use automations to maintain this entire architecture seamlessly. To pull this off, you have to master a really critical distinction: the difference between the current page and the trigger page. Let's say you're building out a recruiting workflow. When you match a candidate to a job opportunity, you want Notion to automatically generate a series of tasks, right? Things like schedule interview and collect resume. When you're configuring that automation, the current page is the candidate, the database item where the automation actually lives. The trigger page is the job opportunity you just linked them to. By understanding this subtle difference, you can dynamically pull properties from the specific triggering event to perfectly populate your new automated tasks. When you are building these out, definitely keep these pro tips in mind. First, use the define variables action. It lets you build a value, like combining a date and a company name, and then reuse it across multiple automated actions without ever recalculating it. Second, to avoid accidentally creating duplicate tasks every single time you edit a relation, just add a setup complete checkbox that stops the automation from firing twice. Super simple. And most importantly, guys, this is a massive warning straight from Notion experts. Always, and I mean always, use a target filter when creating an automation that edits pages. If you don't use a filter, the default behavior will update the properties of literally every single page in your target database. Total nightmare scenario, so don't forget the filter. Now, as great as this is, we do need to be realistic about what these native tools can actually do. Automations have pretty strict limits right now. There is currently no native if-else branching logic inside a single automation. Furthermore, they cannot trigger other automations. So a page created by automation A will absolutely not trigger automation B. And fundamentally, remember that automations only fire on changes that you have already made manually inside the database. They are fantastic for optimizing your existing data, but they aren't going to magically replace your initial data entry. But look, by combining snapshot properties to kill that recalculation lag, flattening your relational hierarchy, and leveraging these targeted automations to seamlessly manage the data flow, you absolutely can achieve that 10x speed improvement in your own workspace. So as you look at your interconnected, beautiful, but maybe slightly sluggish system today, I want to leave you with this question. Which database will you flatten first? Go get in there, clear out that calculation load, and take your workspace speed back. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy building.